Hotep, my brothers and sisters. Just before I begin, do I have to speak into the mic? I do?
You can remove it from the stand.
Okay. Hotep, my brothers and sisters. One of the first things that I would like to do, of course, is to thank our chairperson, our brother, our attorney, Alton Maddox, for inviting me. In his opening remarks, he said of my growth. And clearly my growth has occurred because I have been invited to be able to speak before people such as yourself. I remember before I ever spoke at the Slave Theater, I was told that when you come to the Slave Theater, it's almost, if you were an entertainer, it would be like going before the Apollo Theater. That you're not going to get away with just saying anything. That those who are listening to you will scrutinize your every word and, in fact, even your body motion. And that not only will they scrutinize what you say and your body motion, but that they will know when you start to stray away from the realities of what we're facing. And so my growth has come because every time I speak before you, I know that I must prepare myself to the utmost. In fact, I prepare myself more to speak before you than when I speak before professors at Columbia University, because I understand and I realize what it is that we're facing. And so when I judge myself, I really judge myself for when I present myself to my own people as opposed to others. Yes. Because I've come to realize that there's no one that knows us better than us. And there's no one that knows us better than what we need to do and what we need to say than us. So if I am growing, it is because of you, so I thank you for being so scrutinizing. And so much to the point that you're not just going to let anybody come before you and just say anything. So my growth comes through you, so thank you. I've come to talk to you about a topic that we call skills. And for those who might be interested in copying all of this down, I just want you to know ahead of time, in case you don't, I have prepared a guide for a nominal fee after all this is over, so you don't have to really write a lot down. Much of what you'll see up here is in the guide, so I just want you to know that. Nominal fee of $3 will get you through all of the writing and the other things that we're preparing. I have lesson plans and video guides and a few other things because, you know, I'm growing, as we're all saying, and what I've realized is that as educators and as presenters, when the Kemites would speak, they learned from the Ethiopian and Ugandan and Kenyan teachers the real way of doing things. And sometimes when you're dealing with a subject, and this goes for all of us, whether we're in classrooms or whether we're even amongst ourselves, the reality is that when someone speaks and the participants write, you cannot hear what the person is saying because you're too busy writing. However, if you have the comfort of knowing that much of what you would write is already written, that you can peruse and study at a later date, it makes your attention stronger here. And this is really a key, because this is the first introduction. When I'm in classrooms and I speak to young people, or when I speak to anybody, I attempt to make it such that you will become a part of the procedure of what I'm saying. But if I'm constantly trying to get you to take notes, then part of what I'm saying is not going to be recorded. It'll be recorded in your subconscious, because everything that you experience is in your subconscious. But if you have the ability to focus, then your consciousness is grasping the material, and what you would have written is already done. So it is important that we introduce new ways of learning, because this is the way we learned. We also understand that the great deal of the way in which we learn is orally. Africans often said in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, when the Kemites were bragging about how they had invented this wonderful writing system, they said, well, brother, you're writing because you forget. Because if you train your mind will become the greatest notebook that you ever have. And through atomic power, through the atom philosophy, your mind can write down information in the libraries and the recesses of your mind, so you don't need to write it down because you have it in here. Paper can be destroyed. Many of us are saying, well, you know, the Kemites had the kind of, and it's true, the Kemite had the weather that made things very dry, and paper was able to last, buildings were able to stand strong for many thousands of years. But the Ugandans would have said, well, everything changes, so why keep things permanently? Writing changes, so why do we need writing when I don't forget? So the oral tradition amongst Africans and Native Americans was very important. We write because we are afraid we will forget what we've heard. Africans don't write things down in Central Africa because they never forget. It's all according to your perspective and your African-centeredness of what you're dealing with. Of course, writing is important. I'm not saying that. It is important that we learn to write. I wouldn't say it's important for us to learn script because that's not very important. It's important to learn it as art. And I've often said one of the things when we design our school, along with getting rid of that school bell and the PA system, but that's something I need to talk to you about. Come back at a later date to talk to you about that. But when we begin to develop our schools, some of the things that we're going to realize is that the things that we have now are not really necessary. And that you have, as African people, in your genetic pool, all of the things you need to never forget. Not only will you never forget what you heard, but you'll remember what you were never told. Because the ancestral line will guide you in a way that will clearly let you understand. I've often told people, you know, we're so busy telling each other, and sometimes it's true, but we often tell each other that we need to get our foot in the door. Well, I'm telling you, you don't need to get your foot in the door because you're already in the house. What you got to do is turn on the light and look around. See, you need a facilitator to show you where the light switch is. You don't need someone to hold the door open for you because you're already in the house. And what we have got to do in our classrooms is help our young people understand, if not ourselves, that every bit of information that you need, you already know. And that what we need to become in classrooms are good facilitators. Facilitators of knowledge and information. To allow our young people to know that you already know this math and science. You already know the language arts, the arts and crafts. You already know how to draw, dance, and sing. What you need is someone to let you know that you know this. Because the reason why we are in our classrooms is not to learn. We are in classrooms to become conscious. But not just conscious, but conscious of our consciousness. We need not only to know, we need to know that we know. Some people will call it arrogance. Some people will call it that you're a show-off. But the reality of it is that if you got it, know that you got it. And don't be ashamed to know that you're great. You see, we kind of beat ourselves down in our greatness. And the reality is that we've been trained to do that. When we were getting to the point of extreme knowledge, when we were getting to the point of dignity and pride and integrity, those were the virtues that nobody who is going to be kidnapped or held against their will, no one would allow themselves to be treated that way. So therefore, it was always beat out of us. It was psychologically trained out of us. So therefore, now we still suffer from some of these feelings of greatness, of grandeur. And so when that happens, we try to play it down. Now, there's a difference between humble and having humility. You see, I have no problems with having humility, but I am not humble. There's a difference. It's a semantic difference, of course. It's according to how you define it. But you see, no one can get on your back if you're standing up straight. And too many of us shake off our addictions, but we keep our back bent. But if you stand up, no one can get on your back, because anyone who does will slide off. So what we've got to do in our classrooms is understand our greatness. We have to understand what makes us who we are, and we've got to move forward. We're wasting a lot of time trying to get ourselves out of a pit that we're not in. And what we've got to begin to do, and all that I'm saying is English words that you've all said before, you've all heard before, but the way in which it's being combined is like the constitution and reconstitution of atoms. Because you see, when you transcend from this level or this plane of existence, you're still going to be the same atoms that make you up now. It's just that the constitution of your atoms is going to change. And the same thing has to happen in the classroom. We must reconstitute the atoms. There is nothing new that's going to come into our lives. There is no language that we're going to learn that's going to change the conditions that we're in. It's the way in which we're going to reconstitute and constitute the words that we're using. And the way in which we're going to do that is by looking at a number of different things. And I always like to at least begin with a proverb of some kind, African in nature, And I think that an appropriate proverb for this afternoon's presentation is one that my aunt gave me when she was transcending. And she said that if you give a person a fish, he or she will eat for the day. But that if you teach them how to fish, they will eat for a lifetime. And that's what skills are. In our classrooms, we're teaching our children math and science, but we're not teaching them the process of what this means. And what we have got to begin to do is look at skills as the atomic or the application of atomic knowledge, which we call wisdom. There is a difference between knowledge and wisdom, and we'll talk about it as we go along. Also, if I may say, if there are any questions or comments that you have, please feel free to raise your hand as we're going along. I like to strike while the iron is hot. The question you ask now is not the same flavor as the question you will ask at the end. So please feel free to raise your hand and comment or ask questions as we go along. And of course, we are here assembled as an African people united in a movement, the United African Movement, here at Peg Leg Bates Resort. I know they have another name for it, but in my heart it will always be Peg Legs. And of course, today's date is 8 October 95. Now you can tell I work with children because we got to break it all down that way, you see? And I tend not to try to change my approach because you can even learn something from how to talk to young people. You see, we assume a lot. We assume that everybody knows what we know, and the reality of it is that we can't assume that. And even though I said that I work with children, even sometimes we as adults need to hear the full flavor of what it is that we're experiencing. I know we know where we are. But you know, as you call someone's name, you call them into being. As you call things out atomically, you call things into being, and I always like to work from that perspective. The research that we're doing, looking at what we're experiencing in our classroom and the African curriculum. Now, as I've said before, I will say again, and I will always say, and I want to be careful how I say it, and I hope that I explain it well, and if not, please ask a question or make a comment. There is no such thing as an African-centered curriculum. It doesn't exist. The reason why we call it an African-centered curriculum is because other people have taken a universal body of knowledge and said it's theirs. When African people sat down, the scholars and the scientists, the practitioners sat down and developed this way of transferring knowledge through the generations. They never said this is for African people. They gave it to a universal oneness, a cosmic being. This knowledge, in fact, we wouldn't be in the position we are today if it was African-centered, because those that took it who were not African couldn't have understood it and couldn't have created this civilization. Therefore, it had to be a very generic body of knowledge that was able for anyone to understand through understanding of skills. But I want to be careful because we need to say African-centered because of the balance on the other side. Therefore, we need to get back into an African perspective. This is not so much an African-centered curriculum. This is not revisionist. I've presented, people stood up and said, this is a revisionist theory. This is not a revisionist theory. This is the original theory that you revised. There's a difference. This is not revision. I am not revising anything. I'm returning to the source. You revised the original, okay? I am not teaching this and understanding this for us to go back into Manhattan and back into Chicago and back around the world to build pyramids. But I want to lay the foundations of a sacred scientific thought that led to some of the greatest creations of the world. We cannot go back to Kemet. Kemet is no longer what it was. But we can take their philosophical base, their foundations, and build from there with what we have today. So as our brother Bundy was talking about the technology of today, if you took the African mind and coupled it with today's technology, you would have a dynamic process. So therefore, when we go back, I don't say let's go back and stay back. Let's go back to the future and begin to develop those areas of understanding and learning that will allow us to transcend. Because I guarantee you, when our young brothers and our young sisters get this information, I guarantee you they will have to start a new way of testing, because even they will not understand the level that our young people are on. What's happening in our classrooms are revolutionary. As I was talking to the brothers that brought me up, my brother Dexter and brother Michael, we were talking in the car about a number of different things. And the reality of it is that the world that we're living in is changing very rapidly. And one of the things that we've got to understand is that the great fear that they have is that we will know what to do with what we have. As Gil Scott says in Message to the Messenger, they don't know what to tell our young people, but they know our young people know what to tell each other. So if they keep them apart, they're not going to be able to vibrate off of the future. And I am saying that our young people will take this information and bring it to another level of understanding that will make the computer look like the invention of fire. And that was the first thing that brought us into civilization, or one of the first things, along with the handshake. So the reality is let's look at skills. Let's look at the process. Let's look at what we call functional consciousness. Forget about psychological consciousness. Psychological consciousness is the matter or the material, which has its place. But functional consciousness is the process by which you use psychological consciousness to reach a level of understanding that goes beyond anything else. It is what we call intuition. It is when African folk can come together and all be on one vibe, and yet no one speaks a word. We could do that before. Some of us do it now. What brings you here in support of the United African Movement is that very notion. You may not know it, and each of us may not even know what the Creative Force has planned for us. But Kepra, or the process of becoming, will let us know in time. There's a reason why we're here. The African people in this hemisphere, our purpose is to save this planet. We were taken from Africa, whether we realize it or want to accept this or not. This is my belief. This is what I see. And we were dispersed in this hemisphere from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego in South America in order for us to return back to Africa and save this planet. And once we get this understanding, we will know you don't need great numbers to do that. You just need commitment from a selected few. I'm going beyond Dr. Du Bois's concept of the talented 10th, and I want to work on the conscious 10th. As a conscious 10th, you can be a bus driver, you can be a custodian, you can be a doctor or a lawyer. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be interested in math and science. Just be interested in yourself and in your people. Be interested in this planet and the development of a new world order. Because you see, the only reason why they're dealing with a new world order is because they see the new world order. And you are that new world order. We're talking about skills that are interchangeable. Skills, as we're dealing with it, of course, you know. Skills can be interplayed with wisdom. Knowledge, and this is where we define and we look at certain definitions. Nothing is written in stone, so I just send this out for your own vibration. But we say that knowledge is the accumulation of information. Wisdom is the application of knowledge, or the application of the accumulation of the information that you have learned. If you can't use what you've learned, you've wasted your time. It was no sense sitting there learning that geometric theorem if you don't know that buildings are built from that. It makes no difference to understand variables if you don't understand that variables can be applied in your own life. We interchange wisdom with skills. But I want you to look at the design. Because up here I said skills first, wisdom there. I then gave you a definition, and then I switched them around to show you that it's interchangeable. In a child's mind, you need to do that. You can say it's interchangeable, but you got to show him that it's interchangeable. But you just can't show him. I couldn't give you this and then give you that. I had to take you through the steps that would have proven this, and through proving this, this became that. I could do this mathematically. This is a mathematical equation. This is where math comes from. Math is just not numbers. It's just not variables. It's the material world being written down. It's the spiritual world being written down. And it's showing how matter and energy are interchanged. But when I mention matter and energy to you, I now have moved from math to science, according to them. But to the African, holistic education demands that you interchange all of the different topics. And I could not have done any of these things without the skill of language arts. So holistic education is something that we all must learn. This is the way as African people we learn. We don't open up a math book from 10 to 10:45 and have a math class, and then close that math book and have a social studies class. That's not the way African people learn. It's not the way Native American people learn. It's not the way Chinese people or Japanese people learn in the ancient world. They learn through all of the things around them and allowing them to interchange and look at the world around them. The acquisition of skills allows the learner to apply complex thought processes required to solve basic/advanced challenges. I don't call them problems, because problems to children create another thing. You automatically have a barrier. A challenge is something you look forward to overcoming. Problems sometimes is something people avoid. So I don't use the word problems. I don't use the word math problems, because they're not problems, they're challenges. When you use that word problem, it creates something in the mind of the learner or the person speaking, a problem, and then you're going to turn around and say, I have a very serious problem. Okay? And then you're going to say, well, this problem is not hard. Well, you should have said that before. Well, your problem is not hard either. You see, how are you going to have a problem you can solve here, and now you have a serious problem? Again, going back to language arts and the way in which we use our language, we send messages to our young people that we're just not aware of, but the people writing the book aren't aware of these problems either. And you see, we've been following a people that don't know what they're talking about. Really, we've given a lot of credit to people who just don't know. And as I move on through this area of education, it frightens me because so many people are writing things that they just don't know. And it's frightening, you know. And it's frightening not so much that they don't know, it's frightening that we follow them. It frightens me that some of our most brilliant scholars have to take a second seat to people who know nothing. And these are issues that I'm facing every day. These are processes required to solve basic and advanced challenges and make decisions in everyday life and classroom learning. That's why we're around. That's why school is what it is. That's why when the African scholars sat down, they said, look, we may have this knowledge, but now we have to find a way to transfer it to those who are coming up younger than we. So they set up a way in which to train and to teach young people, and this is what they said, that skills was what they were after. And it's the subjects you use to take them through the process to acquire the skill. But once they learn what they're supposed to learn, that's not important. It was the process that was important. But look at the way we test our children. We test our children in a way that for all we know, they could have been very good guessers and got everything right, with no ability to know the process. But we're willing to accept the fact that as long as you mark sense that A, that's okay. We don't know how they got their answer. If they looked over somebody's shoulder at the answer, we have no knowledge of that. All we know is that they got A right, which is absolutely opposite what we really should be after. And if I may also tell you that in the lower left-hand side, I use Kemetic numbers. I don't use the Hindu Arabic, although that's African too. I use the Kemetic number system. Okay. Skills. After you get the basic skills, we're looking at higher order thinking skills. We call them the HOTS. Higher order thinking skills demands that thinking about thinking thoughts leads to knowing about knowing knowledge. Think about that. Thinking about thinking thoughts leads to knowing about knowing knowledge. That's heavy. But look how many times I repeat the same word. You see, this is what we must do, African perspective, to use English, which, by the way, Malcolm called the language of liars. We need to use English more as a metaphor. And this is why I will say again, as I always say, I celebrate our young people with hip-hop. because nothing clearly brings us back to the metaphor than the hip-hop. But I can't say hip-hop without saying bebop. And I can't say bebop without saying the blues of the plantation. We are a metaphoric people. What we say, we hit a straight line with a crooked stick. Double entendres. We don't say it. It would be too easy just to say it. The thing about life is to break it so that it's exciting, you know, and that's what we do. Please. That's right. That's right. My daddy used to say, you know, you think you're so slick, you're going to pass yourself slide. This process, kepra, this process is enhanced, embellished, and expanded by the teacher/facilitator understanding the importance of questioning techniques. We don't ask enough questions, we're too busy talking. That's why we get burnt out, because we do so much talking. By the end of the day, we're so out of breath. We're tired, we're ready to go home and go to sleep. Whereas if we had been a facilitator in that classroom, we would have been able to gather all of the cumulative knowledge of all of the ancestors of all of our children. Our classrooms are going to get larger. They're not going to get smaller. But I have no problem with that. Because the more folk of African descent we have in a classroom, the more ancestors we have with us. I've been told by a sister from South Africa, she had a class of 250 students, and she didn't have not one discipline problem. Not one. This was, of course, before our young people stopped going to school in the 70s, of course. This is when African folk taught African folk, before the other pieces of information came in. You know, it's not about classroom management, and it's not even about money. Frederick Douglass did it on breadcrumbs. It's not about money, not when you get down to it. It's about purpose. It's about understanding. When we were on that plantation, we had a lot of people at our meetings. Nobody made a murmur if we knew that someone would hear. Not even the babies knew to be quiet in their mother's arms. It's not about numbers. People say it would be easier with smaller classrooms, and that might be true in today's situation. But when we were ready to learn, we sat around a master teacher, and it wasn't a matter of numbers. They weren't thinking about a 12-to-1 ratio. They were looking for the most able students to be with the most able master teachers, and knowledge was transferred. But we're facing a whole nother dimension out here in our classrooms. Therefore, we need smaller classrooms because the children are conspiring against the teacher. But I can't blame them because I conspired against mine too, because they were boring, and they didn't tell me the truth. And anybody under those conditions, you'd be a fool not to conspire. So let's look at our questioning techniques. And I like to take words that can help us remember. Like I always remember the 5 Great Lakes of America by Holmes, Huron, Ontario. Thank you. That tells you how much I really care. Erie and Superior. Okay. So food technique. Food, the first, the F is factual. Basically questions that the facilitator will ask that will bring forward true or false, right or wrong answers. The first O is for opinion. You'll have varying responses. Everyone has one. The second O is for open-ended. Many times in these questions you have the words some, ever, or any. For example, do you have some? You asked a question. Have you ever? Asked a question. Do you have any? And you asked a question. Some, ever, any, we call it C. Finally, the D stands for descriptive. The descriptive describes any of the above or describes something, someone, someplace, etc. Questioning techniques that lead to the concept of the higher order thinking skills. Now, I want to list for you the thinking and reasoning skills. Of course, they are not limited to this. Of course, you probably have your own. But I would at least like to focus on some so we can at least begin to vibrate on the concept of what a skill is. You have problem solving, you have decision making, you have inferences, whether they be inductive or deductive. I will define both those words. You have as 4 divergent thinking skills, you have evaluative thinking skills, and you have philosophy, and you have reasoning. Page 5. Also, notice how the Kemites did their 5. 3 on top, 2 on the bottom. And you wonder where we got Roman numerals from? Okay, you notice that 6 will have 3 on top, and we'll add the 1 where the 2 was on the 5. You will also notice that the larger number always begins on the top. Let's look at the number 1 of the problem solving, and let's break that down into some numbers, and you will also notice the Kemetic numbers here. You see, we're transferring this. We're moving from one to another. I'm not adding anything new. They're still the same numbers. They're still all the same. I'm just giving you an African perspective, and this is what we must do with our young people. Identifying a general problem. Sort of self-explanatory, but so many of our young people cannot do that. In fact, part of the reason why we're in the problem we're in today is because we did not do number 1 of number 1 and identify a general problem. And the general problem came to our shores, and we didn't identify it. Number 2 would be clarifying the problem, being very specific, clarifying it, being clear on what the problem really is. Formulating hypotheses. Now again, I go to the point that when I throw out a word like hypotheses, it's just a little bit different than other words, so I think it's important to define it, not through the dictionary, but by using Reverend Ishaka Musa Barashango's definition, which again is an African-centered definition. Some people might want to go to Webster. Some people might want to go to Webster Merriam. Some people might want to go to any of the other reference books. I turn to Reverend Barashango. That's my option. That's your option. Wade Noble tells us that power is the ability to define one's reality and have that person accept that definition. Well, I reject Webster. My reality is Reverend Ishaka Musa Barashango. And if I say that, that's what it is. You understand what I'm saying? You can sit there and argue with me, I'll go with that. But after all the argument is over, I'm opening up African Genesis by Reverend Ishaka Musa Barashango. When I define reality, I go to Dr. Wade Nobles. When I look at metamorphosis, I go to Dr. Naeem Akbar. When I go to genetic annihilation, I go to Dr. Francis Creswellson. Now, there are people who can argue with me, and we can sit here and go through it, but after it's all over, I'm going back to where I am. That's what Dr. Wade Nobles teaches us. Now, the question is, some people feel very nervous about that. Some people would rather stutter on what Webster says. But remember, Webster made a deal with the devil. Hypothesis. Hypothesis, to assume, suppose, lay basis for a temporary explanation of an occurrence based on known data, thus validating a basis for further research. Let me give you a sentence that might explain what a hypothesis is, as Reverend Barashango gave us. It seems to be that, which if you were looking for one word, a hypothesis would be probable. Simple as that. Continuing on, formulating appropriate questions. You see, to know what you don't know, you got to know what you know. To know what you know automatically guarantees you that you will learn what you don't know, because you already know. So you've already set up your lack of knowledge through your fulfillment of knowledge. That is why it's so important to look at questioning techniques. And that's why it's so dangerous the way we test, because in the African and Native American world, They never tested you after you learned. They tested you before you learned, because they wanted to know what you didn't know so they could teach it to you. When you test somebody after, you're really playing a game to see what they don't know, so you can punish them. Exactly. That's the bottom line. And that's what we do. Write it 200 times. Go to summer school. Repeat the grade. Sidestep. I think you need special ed. You see? I'll tell you who needs special ed. See, I've often said children are not special ed. Well, first of all, I call it challenge. I don't use the word special ed, because all of us need special ed. Special ed revolves around time. When I counsel special ed teachers who teach our challenged children, whether they be emotional, physical, or spiritually challenged, I often tell them it's time you're dealing with, nothing else. You're going to teach them the same thing you teach all the other children, but you're going to take into consideration time. A child who is physically handicapped, let's say through a leg, who possibly may have a limp. If you were to get to the door, the question that I ask is it that you want everyone to get to the door, or is it important who gets to the door first? Well, to me, it would be everybody gets to the door. Therefore, those who may be physically handicapped, it's going to take a little bit more time. That's all. But they're going to get to the door. For lack of a better word, they have a whole bunch of classifications, you know. They had 11 the last time I checked. Now that OJ's free, they got 12, but we'll get into that later on. See, that 12 is everybody that thought that OJ was innocent. But the question really is, if a child cannot get a math problem right away, the question is, do you think the child can get the problem right, or do you think they need time to get it? I would say it's time. I don't care how long it takes. Just go through the process. I don't care how long it takes you to get to that door. Just get to that door. So teachers need to learn patience and time, and they can teach any child anything, anywhere. Formulating appropriate solutions. Now you got the question down, what's the solution? You must choose the best solution. You might have formulated the appropriate solution, but that don't mean you're going to choose the right solution. Therefore, you must be able to choose the right solution, but then you must apply it. You can formulate the appropriate question that leads to the appropriate solution. You can choose the best solution, but you must apply it. The difference between choosing the best solution and applying the solution is the difference between opening of the door and walking in. You can open the door, but if you don't walk in, why'd you open the door? Many of our young people get to the door, open the door, but are afraid to walk in. Why? Because they've been beat against walking in. That's the point where most people will stop them. Generating related ideas. Here's the metaphor. You see, when our young people get up with the hip hop and they begin to give you related ideas, sometimes as adults we get very upset. We say we don't like that. But the reality of it is that what else can a child give you but what they're relating it to? Richard Pryor would have said, what did it mean to me? What does it mean to me? And this is where many of our educators get in trouble, because they do not relate it to the ideas of the young people. They do not see themselves in the process of what it is that they're learning. Everybody's throwing them. I have a physics book. Everybody in the physics book is of European descent. Everybody. When you study astronomy, you start with Copernicus. Who, by the way, the whole world was against him. But you start with Copernicus. They don't tell you that the church tried to kill him. They just tell you about Copernicus. They then tell you about Galileo. They tell you about Johannes Kepler, born in Stuttgart, Germany. But what they don't tell you is that half the world, if not all the world of European descent, rejected his ideas. It's only now that they realize he was almost there. And you would think that those are Kepler's ideas. But Kepler himself admitted he studied the Egyptian golden rule of the motion of the planets. He admitted it himself, but they don't put that in the books. So they'll tell you Kepler was the one that invented this, or Copernicus invented this. I'm about to publish the first piece on the Kemetic origin of the universe, which calls forward, oh, tell. But that wasn't what I was going to say. That was just a preface to what I was going to say. Yeah, the Spirit made me say it just to set the pace for what I was going to tell you. But I'm now doing the Kemetic origin of the solar system. And I'm taking the third philosophy of the Memphite text, and I'm comparing it to the Dogon text, which makes me do research into the Dogon. The Dogon knew that Saturn had rings. They knew that Jupiter was surrounded by icebergs long before anybody had come to Africa to tell them that. The Dogon knew of a star system known as Sirius. They call it Sirius A, but Sirius B was what was so outstanding because Sirius B can't be seen by the human eye. And a European couldn't even get to it with the most mightiest of telescopes until just recently. They knew that there was a 50-year rotation of Sirius B around Sirius A. And they had charted in the sands all of the movements from 1920. They had a ceremony known as the Sigui, S-I-G-U-I, every 60 years. And when Marcel Griol and Dieter Lang, male and female, went there and studied, every time they have a ceremony, they have a mask. But they had 12 masks. So you multiply 12 times 60, it means they were celebrating that ceremony in the 1200s. Long before they even knew any of this information, the Africans were celebrating it. But you gotta take a step back and take a breather because there's something I'm going to drop on you here because this is something very important. In order to understand Sirius, in order to understand astronomy, you have got to experience a couple of times. So if the Kemites had a great year of many, many thousands of years, whatever we want to say that is, you just can't forecast right away. Let's say you're dealing with a great year of 46,000 years. You just can't say. It takes one time, which is 46,000 years, to know that you're going to go through the 12 houses of the constellations. It's like, let's say somebody walked through this door and left that door. They came around the first time, like this. Could anybody in this room say you know they're going to come back when they're going to come back? No. You've just experienced it. Let's say they come back a second time. You still don't know if there's a pattern because it's the second time you've seen them. It's not until the second time they come around that you say, didn't they come around the first time? Let's see when they come back around. That's when you measure. You're aware that there's a pattern, you've seen them twice. Then they come back around and you say then, well, how long did it take? Well, that's when you got your measurement. But that's still no guarantee they're going to come back around that same time. So it's not until they come around the fourth time that you can actually say, so if someone has a great year of 46,000 years, they got to experience that a couple of thousand times. You're dealing with a civilization that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And I'm telling you, when all this is said and done, if they say that the Kemetic legacy began 4100, I guarantee you we're going back 500,000 years in Egypt. Now, I'm telling you that now. Time will bear me out. If I'm wrong, I'm going to be dead, so it don't make a difference. And if I do, and when I do come back, I'm going to be in another form, so I'm not going to lay claim that I said it the first time around. But if I'm right, then we'll have a body of knowledge that will go beyond all expectations. The Sphinx. I know I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Sphinx was not the head of a man, nor is it the body of a lion. It's the body of a lioness and the head of a woman. because it was born and created within the Leo Virgo house. Not just that, they're pushing the pyramids back 10,000 years now. And I'm guaranteed, if they're pushing it back 10,000 years, give it 100,000 years. Because you cannot get a body of knowledge just like that. The Nok culture, the Nok heads, they say were made 900 years BC. But to get to that level of artistic greatness, you would have to have been doing that thousands of years to get to that level. So the Nok culture merely is the peak of what you see. But all of the years that led up to that is what you got to focus on. This is what Africa will show us. And these are the skills. These are the kinds of questions we need to be asking ourselves. These are the kinds of things we need to be asking our young people. What do you think? You get to your 9th and 10th grade and you do algebra and geometry, but it's the math you learned in kindergarten that helps you to do that math up in the greater years. So the same is true, that if that's true, then it is also true that much of the greatness of Kemet, of the pyramid building, and you see the writing system, the pharaonic system, all they say was born. That's why they say that people from outer space came down. Because they say that, you see, there is no sign that writing grew in Kemet. All of a sudden, it's there. Now, Kustal is the answer. Because it is obvious that they were writing in Lower Kemet, in Nubia, many years prior to the movement of Africans going into Kemet. Nothing could have been born in northern Kemet, in the Delta, because it's marshland. These are questioning techniques. These are just thinking ideas. You can't build no pyramids in the marsh. You can't even begin to build anything on marsh, because if you live in marsh, you have a marsh mentality. But if you live in solid ground in Kemet and in Upper Kemet, which is the south, and in Ethiopia and Sudan, if you're on solid ground, and if you go to Namuratunga being in northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia, I use the two because they're the same people. You see, it wasn't until 1885 that they carved Kenya from Ethiopia. These were the same Cushitic people in this area. So it's very important that as we develop these philosophies, we understand what it is that we're facing here as a people. The writing system, the pharaonic system, was in place in Lower Africa. In Namuratunga, there is evidence of Cushitic people looking at 7 different stars and constellations, developing ideas as how to begin to look at stars. They were tracking Sirius. They knew how to look at Sirius in Namuratunga. So if they knew how to look at Sirius in Namuratunga, and there is no evidence of people in the northern climes looking at Sirius, and then you look at an entire system such as the Kemetic system or the Dogon system, who have a very special affinity to Sirius, I would dare say that idea came from Africa. Not unless you want to believe in some miracle, which I have no problem with, but we ain't dealing with that here. Because we have solid ground to work on here. So why make up hypotheses, as our brother would say? No need for further research. That's not a hypothesis. In the vernacular, we have another word for that, but I'll leave that alone. Monitoring acceptance of the solution. In other words, you generate related ideas, but then you monitor acceptance of the solution. In other words, is it valid? Does it work? Can it continue to be worked? You just don't accept it and let it go. You test it and you retest it, you revise it, you look at it again and again. And then you draw your conclusions. Very important piece. To the first piece that we're talking about in terms of problem solving. Number 2 is decision making. Number 2 in decision making, you state your desired goal or your condition. A lot of young folk have a problem with that. They do not know how to state their goal. They don't know what they're looking for. But I don't blame them, because I didn't know what I was looking for either when I was back there studying. It wasn't until I sat before the feet of John Henry Clark that I was able to state my desired goal or condition. It was not until I studied the works of Naim Akbar, Dr. Ben, Richard King, that I began to understand how to even state a desired goal or condition. I didn't even know what a goal or a condition was. But how can you? Because whether you realize it or not, you may think that this society, Western civilization, is going into a particular direction, but we are aimlessly moving through space with no concept of our purpose on this planet, not to even understand that the Earth, people talk about getting into a satellite and flying around into a spaceship. The Earth is a spaceship. We are traveling in space at phenomenal speed. We are following the direction of a sun, and the sun is following in the direction of a whole new universe. And it is only those who are aware. Remember the symbolic story of Noah. They laughed at him for 40 years. Brother was building the ark. He was telling people a flood was coming. They laughed at him. They told him, "You don't know, you're a fool." He said, "There's a flood coming." He said, "Because I can sense the Creator's voice." And anyone that doesn't understand where we're headed, we're in very serious trouble. Because there's a flood coming. And we are here assembled to build an ark. And we're going to take two of everything. Because a lot of people are not going to follow us. You know that. You know, and I tell people, you know, you're not going to have a lot of people. A lot of people don't sense what's going on out there. They don't understand. That's why only one or two, a pair of each, so that you can continue the law of opposites, complements. Because, see, a lot of people are not going to follow. They're going to call us fools. Because they don't see and know that there are changes. You can't go back. The law of the universe says you can't go back. Civilizations can only move forward when they're pushed. They can regress. They can't even stand still, because the act of standing still is in fact the act of regression, because the universe is moving forward. And as you move forward, you stand still, you're regressing. We are pushing the universe. And our actions are cleansing the universe. And the universe is cleansing its own blood system. And everything you see happening is going to happen no matter what. What we're experiencing is like the common cold. It's going to take its course no matter what you do. Number two, stating challenges to goal condition. You must know what you're going to face. Our brother, Alton Maddox, has many gifts. But one of his greatest gifts is the gift of prophecy. The greatest leaders know what the future holds. I would never follow a leader that didn't know the future. If a leader say he didn't know what was going to come up ahead, I'm not going with you. I'd rather just stay where I am. But these retreats and all that happens in the UAM is an act of prophecy. It's an act of knowing what the future holds so that when the future comes, you'll be ready. And this is what I grew up on. My mother used to say, "Skip," that's my nickname. "Skip, the doors may not be open now, but whether they're open or not, you prepare yourself so that when they open, you'll be able to walk through." So people looked at me and they said, "But what you studying this African stuff for?" You know, they used to put bets on me. And the only way I used to know that they put bets on me was when I used to come up to them. And they say, "Give me my $5. I told you he's either going to say something about Africa or Malcolm." Now, is that an act of prophecy or what? Brothers and sisters were putting money down on that. But if you notice, the two most important concepts amongst us today is Malcolm and Africa. So we had the gift of prophecy. And so prophecy is very important, and you must be able to state your challenges, and you can't state a challenge unless you know the future. Because your challenge hasn't come yet. You can see what's coming down the road. Identifying alternatives. What are your solutions? Alternative solutions. What are your alternatives? That's the greatest thing we can give our young people. As counseling goes, and sometimes I do counseling. I'm not a counselor, but I counsel. I counsel counselors. And one thing I found out about counselors is that the people who need counseling the most are counselors. But only rightfully so, because they carry so many people's stuff around. They need someone to get their stuff off on. And they need somebody who can, bounce it off, you know. But in bouncing off, you must make sure it bounce off. Don't let it stick. You know that saying, I'm like rubber and you're like glue. What you say bounce off me and stick to you? So a counselor must be somebody who can allow things to just bounce off. Some of the greatest psychologists, well, some of the most greatest psychologists are the ones with the most problems, but some of the greatest psychologists are those who are good listeners and who can repeat in a clear way what the person is saying. And then the person starts to listen, and they begin to realize they're spouting all of their challenges and all the things they're going through and what holds them back, and the psychologist or the counselor is nodding their head and repeating what they're saying. Oh, going to your parents' house creates this. Oh, okay. And pretty soon, the person begins to listen and say, am I saying this? And then pretty soon, what the counselor does is offer alternatives. The worst thing you can do is tell somebody, because first of all, most people who come to you with a problem ain't coming to hear what you want to hear or what you have to say. They're really coming to let it out, hoping that in letting it out, something will come that they can deal with. So our job as counselors and as adults with our young people is to just repeat what they're saying. You don't have to give them no solutions. You know, and I'm sure that we have spoken about the situation with OJ, and I want to be very careful, but being that it's very clear, many young people have come to me and asked me. I have never told them what I feel, nor have I ever told them what I consider to be right or wrong. I just take them through the process of learning. What happened? How do you feel? What is right? What is wrong? What is this? What is that? You don't have to give solutions. You don't have to be the answer. The same is true with our period of bondage that they call slavery. I never tell people that it was wrong. I take them through the process of what happened. You don't have to tell young people what's right and wrong. Take them through the process, they'll come to their own conclusion. And once they come to their own conclusion, you've taught them how to fish, and they'll solve any problem that comes that way again, considering possibly if they try to put them shackles around their hands again. But if you tell them, you don't give them the opportunity of thinking the process out to come to their own conclusion. Therefore, when it happens again, they may not be able to deal with it. Okay? Examining alternatives. Okay, you've identified the alternative, but now let's flesh it out. Let's talk about it. Let's examine it. Is it good? Like what we were talking about in terms of the period of bondage. Was it right to do what they did? Was it right for us to do what we did? How can we begin to look at this in another way? Examining the alternatives, ranking the alternatives. What do you think you'd want to do first? If there was a fire in this room, what do you think you'd want to do first?
Get out.
Get out. That's true. But there are considerations, and Mother Franklin, you are one. Because my rank would be I'd want you and all the other elders out first. I'd want all the children out. I then would want to look at people who were physically challenged. I'd want to look at the different exits and which would be closer. People in the back, I wouldn't want you running out this exit when you have an exit there. People on this side, I wouldn't want you running out this exit or that exit. I'd want you going out there. But what's out there? Well, let's send somebody out there to see. You see, you're ranking your alternatives. What is important? What are the realities that we're facing? Is there a fire at all? Or has someone just called a false alarm? You see? These are the things we flesh out with our young people that for some reason when we're in classrooms, we assume they know all this and they don't. But the reality of it is that the adult don't know it either. Because we have not gone through this. There have been some do. I'm not saying all don't. There are some dynamic people. Some of the greatest human beings I've ever met have been teachers. So I don't want to downplay that. I'm a teacher myself and very proud to be. So I don't want to downplay that. But The system itself does not do these kinds of things, because if you know how to make your own decisions, what you going to do? You're going to be free. You will liberate yourself. No one will tell you freedom is at hand, because your freedom will be in your hand. You know, freedom is not at hand. Freedom is in your hand. Your foot's not in the door. Your body's in the house. Choosing the best alternative. Okay? You've identified, you've examined, you've ranked. Now you must choose. And in choosing, it's the process of application when you choose. Because okay, here is something you identified. Talk. You've examined, you've talked. You ranked, you talked. But when you choose, you act. And that's the difference. And then, of course, you evaluate your actions. Was it right? Well, if there's a fire in this building and you get burned, you've evaluated your actions. But if everybody has gotten out safe and sound, you also evaluate your actions. Decision making, number 2. Now let's get into this heavy stuff, because here's where Sherlock Holmes comes into play. Inferences. Now, the way in which we look at it is inferences is to conclude from your evidence. Now, you know, I'm going to leave that alone, because you know where I can take that. To conclude from your evidence. If there are 2 words that are indelibly marked in my mind, it's reasonable doubt. Out of inferences, to conclude from evidence of what you have. Because you see, a lot of people don't conclude from evidence. They conclude from hearsay. They conclude from he say, she say. They conclude from what they perceive. And the problem with perceptions is that perceptions are your senses, and your senses can deceive you. Conclude from evidence. Evidence. What do you have in documentation? Forget about what they say. A, inductive thinking skills. Inductive. Let's look at that definition. Reasoning. Reasoning in which general principles are derived from particular facts or instances. Determining cause and effect. One of the most important concepts in our universe. Cause and effect. You do this, this will happen. You do this, that will happen. Determining cause and effect. If our young people knew this, they say that at one time 1 out of 4 of our young brothers were in prison. Now they say 1 out of 3. If we determined cause and effect, 0 of us would be in prison. Because we would know what the effect of the cause was. My mother used to say, you really want to get back? You got a big mouth, boy. This is back in the day. So you got a lot to say. What you really want to get back at them? Get an education. Get an education, and you make them get on their knees and cry. That's the key. I've watched our young people play into their hands, particularly our children who are in our challenge classes. If a teacher's having a particularly bad day, and this is not a good teacher I'm talking about, and they feel like getting Kwame out of class, they say, Kwame, how your mother today? Kwame will go off. Because Kwame's, for some reason, mother may set him off. Talking about his mother may set Kwame off. So say, Kwame, how you, and he might have a little twerk, or she may have a little twerk in her voice. How's your mother today? Kwame will go off. That's it for Kwame. Cause and effect. But if I could get to Kwame, I say, Kwame, you know what's going to happen. Let them say what they want to say. Cause and effect. Our young people don't understand this. They play on our children's feelings. I remember one time I was in a junior high school, and this gentleman didn't look like us, brought his child into school. Child was, I think, in the 4th grade. Child got a computer at home. Child belongs to a computer club. Child has everything computer. 4th grader came in a junior high school 8th grade class, and that child was just zipping through the computer. He said, look, my son can do this. What's wrong with you? Half the class went off. He was lucky he got out the building. he ticked the class off because he was attempting to denigrate these older students, but he never told them all the things that the child had. The one thing he never told the child was the money that he made by denigrating the students was the money he spent to buy the computer in the first place. To send them into that special computer club in that special neighborhood. But you see, our children don't have that sense and they're not brought up from this perspective. Therefore, they can be played with. And then, of course, the next step is, of course, Rikers Island. So these are the things that we're facing. But again, skills is what our young people need to learn. Because if they had this skill, they would have played it off. You see? And so this is what we have to work on with our young people. Analyzing open-ended problems. An open-ended problem is a problem that is open-ended. It has a lot of different solutions, but you must analyze what the open-endedness of it is and where do you go with it from there. And these are the kinds of things that we're looking at in terms of inductive reasoning skills or thinking skills. Reasoning by analogy. But I cannot put analogy down without putting symbol, without putting metaphor, without putting allegory. And if I had room, I would have put a comma and put hip-hop. Reasoning. Because that's what our young people are doing in hip-hop. Hip-hop is not rap. Hip-hop is a culture. Rap is a manifestation of hip-hop. It is a part of hip-hop. But hip-hop is a culture. Our young people have a culture. When I listen to our young people talk, they are speaking on an allegorical perspective. We may not like those curse words. We may not like the terrible things we hear. But go beyond what you hear, because my mother used to say, but it ain't bad, it's good, Skip. I say, yeah, it's bad. But it's not bad, it's good. But it's so good it became bad. And when it's better than bad, it's bad. And when it's better than bad, then I got to get my body into it. And we are a metaphoric people. This is how we play in our life. This is the way in which we enjoy it. Making inferences, making the conclusions from the evidence that you have, making them happen, determining relevant information. You see what we've experienced for the past year and something? All of this comes out of skills. Had we had skills, we'd have had no problem. But guess what? We had skills and we had no problem. The people with the problem are the people without the skills because they don't have this ability. They didn't understand what was going on around them. And as Richard Pryor would have said, they wouldn't have known it if they tripped over it. The reality of it is that we are placed here at this time to fulfill the universal prophecy. We are meant to show them the way. Because they don't know, but the only way we could show them the way was to come over here. And since none of us were going to volunteer to come over here, they had to drag us over here. So we are part of the book. And believe me, this process is going to unfold. And it's very important. Don't worry, I left a young one doing that. That's all right. That's all part of it. She can stay here. I'm so used to working under those conditions, I don't know what to do. I wouldn't trade it for nothing in the world. Music to my ears. It's when I don't hear that I worry. You know, a young one is coming up on 2. In fact, today, our son Heru is 21 months. And as I look around at our young people and I study the work of Amos Wilson, I come to understand how brilliant and prophetic that brother was. But you know, also, as Bob Marley sings, you know, how long will we stand aside and watch our prophets? I'm not getting the words right because I'm trying to knock it off right away, but he's talking about to fulfill the book, you know, and as much as I miss our brothers and sisters who have gone before us, I can't help but understand that it was their time. And they did all they could on this level in order to return back on another level, but the work of Amos Wilson was phenomenal. And while I had And while I have all of his books and anxiously looking forward to the blueprint, I read his work now, and I see really how prophetic he was. Because, and you will see it happen even more with our young people. and their absolute brilliance. You know, my son came a little early, and he was put in intensive care. And there's a room down the hall that is for children who have come out of intensive care but still need attention down the hall. And when I went in, they had children of color, children not of color, male, female. The first to leave that room were the young African girls. They were the first to leave. They were the first ready to leave. The first to mature was the African female. The next to leave was my son, the African male. I didn't see the others because they never got there. And as our brother was transcending, I recalled his work in The Psychology of the Black Child, where he breaks down the development of our children. And I also got a little concerned because I know they know. And so I'm not surprised when last time they checked, 1 in 4 was in prison, and why now 1 in 3 is in prison. And the only way you can get up here is by passing a prison that's full of us down on that road across from Jamesway. What I find most interesting is that the tops of the buildings are pyramids. But those pyramids are going to save those young people that are in that prison, because that power is going to come down. And if they think that corn is growing now, wait till you see what's going to grow in that prison. And you let us in there. Okay, determining relevant information, recognizing relationships. You got to recognize relationships. Again, part of the metaphor. You got to understand the relationship. When I used to say something was bad, I was making a relationship with what was good. Whether or not it was acceptable to those who were listening didn't make a difference. What was important to me was the person I was talking to. If my buddy said, yeah, that's bad, that's all I cared about. If someone I was talking to didn't understand, I said, well, hey, it's an African thing. Solving insight challenges. Insight, I wanted to define because of its importance. Insight is the capacity to discern the true nature of a situation or penetration. The true nature. Not what you perceive, but what the true nature. What is the true nature? And you must penetrate beyond the outside to the inside. And that is why it was depicted as an eye in the front of the head. So you must solve insight or insightful challenges. In other words, you must go beyond just the outside problem and go deeper in. The Dogon had information on 4 levels. We teach the same levels, by the way. We just confuse them. You have the word from the front. After you get that down and you grow, you have the word from the back. You then have the words on the sides. And then when you're ready, you get the word from the inside, or what they call the clear word, which means the spirit, the clear word, the word of the insight. You have penetrated all of the periphery. You have penetrated what you see on the outside. Okay? What you see on the outside is deceiving. See, because you can look at an oasis and think you're looking at something. You can look at a mirage and think you're looking at something. It's not until you get inside that you understand. You see, it's not until you get into the center of the hurricane that you understand the damage that the hurricane can cause. But what's so interesting is that in the eye of the hurricane, it's calm.
Bad sour.
So as we begin to flesh out and deal with these issues, you can see the allegories that we can make with our young people. Imagine being in a classroom and discussing issues like this and working this way. Our children gravitate towards this. They play on that. In the schools where I go, they call me Mr. Hotep Man. From the inductive, we go to the deductive thinking skills. Deductive, a logical method in which a conclusion necessarily follows from propositions stated. Now again, you know, with all that we've experienced, you can relate all this, because this was the thinking that went on. This is the thinking we have always used. You have a large intellect, you have a clear intellect, and you have a fine intellect. Malcolm, our brother Alton, our sister Leola, because Alton would not be Alton without Leola. Let's be clear.
That's right.
and I appreciate his recognition of this constantly. I would not be who I am without my African queen.
That's right.
And for those who have the queens that support and do all those necessary things, we can see this occurring. A large intellect is an intellect that has a lot of concepts. A fine intellect is an intellect that can pinpoint the intellect, and the clear intellect, or the large, the clear, and the fine. The fine is the one that can pinpoint. The clear is the one that can, the ready. It's the fine, the large, and the ready. The ready intellect is the intellect that can call upon command the knowledge they need. Malcolm was a clear example of that. He could pinpoint what he was saying. He had a lot of concepts, and the moment someone asked him a question, the brother he was ready. Ready. That is not something that you're born with. That's something that's a skill. You work on that. And these are the things that if we work with our community and our children, we can develop, because they already have those already. So it's clear that we understand that. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I would say doing the 6, what you calling that, math.
Learning. Cooperative learning, which a lot of people are getting into now, which has always been around. In other words, the way in which we set up our center is that we have round tables and children sit at the tables. We don't have the rows and the columns. See, the rows and the columns are set up so that people will, the teacher feel intimidated. And that if you bring groups together, children will pretty much figure out the teacher don't know what's going on because they talk among themselves. But if you keep them in rows and columns, everybody is separate. And everybody's focused in up front. Thank you, my sister. Therefore, you cannot develop those kinds of issues or concepts in a rows and columns setup. One of the most important things that they've come to realize is that talking among students is very important. You know, silence is not always golden. Sometimes silence is deadly. And it's very important that our children, if our children, you know, our lunch hours, for those who are teachers, probably one of the times that is regretted the most is lunch duty. And the reason why lunch duty is truly regretted is because many of our young people really begin to let out their melanin during the lunch period. And the reason why there's a problem is not because the children have a problem, it is because they have been so suppressed all morning long. Not being able to talk, not being able to move. When you bathroom them, they call I'm sorry? Exactly. And that is not the way of the world. You're not supposed to be restricted. That's why when they call it bathrooming children. It sounds like cattle, like you're going to walk a dog. They bathroom children, and the children online are like this, and we're constantly telling them, stand still, stand up straight, blah, blah, blah. But they can't, because they got to move. That melanin got to move in. And then in many classes, they punish the children who are really of whatever nature by, well, you can't go to gym class. Well, that's the last thing you should do to a child like that. If anything, when they act like that, send them to gym. Because we are a people of movement. When we were in Africa, we moved. We learned under the baobab tree or the yegba tree. We were sent by our elder from one side to another side to do something, to act, to do, to move. Yet now we restrict them. We make them stand still. So that when lunchtime comes, here they come all doing their thing. Hotep, my brother, thank you. They move, and at lunchtime, the talking level is so high that they need to bring bullhorns in to talk to the children. But if the children had been allowed to interface, to interchange, to share during the morning classes, there'd be no need for the explosion at lunch. But you see, it's the way the system is set up. And you have no choice. So this is the things that we see. Thank you for sharing that, because that allowed me to talk about cooperative learning, which is very important, something that we've got to get back into. Cooperative learning. And to have circles. And I don't even believe in having square seats, tables, circles, so that everybody can see each other. To have times during the day, you know, a lot of teachers say, oh, the last thing I want to do is have them send all them those desks back and have them sit in a circle. But a well-disciplined class, a class that knows that they can express themselves, is not going to give you problems. I don't have those kind of problems. I have other problems. There are things I have to overcome with young people, like all other educators do. But once we get together, there's one thing that the young people know. There's two things the young people know. I love and I respect them. And that bottom line allows what we need to do to happen. Same thing with that sister from South Africa. When she had all 250 children knew that she loved and respected them and wanted the best from them. Therefore, they loved and respected her back and gave her their best. It's a natural, it's reciprocity. It's like the sun rising and setting. You would never doubt that the sun would rise and set. No more than I would doubt that children will do the right thing if they're around people who do the right thing. Please, my sister. It's
They
true.
were doing fine.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely.
That's all you need.
Yeah,
And children recognize that.
they certainly
And
do.
if you want to go in a classroom, all you have to do is ask the children to help you.
That's right.
And they would tell you.
That's right. That's right. And you know, that's an interesting thing because all children like to feel as if they help. And you know, in fact, sometimes, bless their hearts, it gets in the way. Because once they find someone that they can teach something to, then they want to teach you everything. So then they bless their heart. I love it, but the idea proves the point that they will go beyond all. And some of the roughest necks, some of the ones that would have been in all these different classes are the ones that will come back. And some people say they surprise me. They don't surprise me. They merely do what I know they can do in the first place. What surprises me is that we don't know that. Please.
All the gentlemen beneath the videos, Russell Means from the...
Russell Means. Okay. Russell Means? Okay. Yeah, that's the Dynamite Brother. Okay. So we have defined deductive. Deductive, number one, using logic. Of course, now logic, be careful of because logic changes with the culture you're dealing with. So it's important to be careful what logical is. Because, you know, you can be logical and living in an illogical society. And you think you illogical. You follow what I'm saying? And you can be illogical living in a logical society and think you logical. You see? So it's important that we be careful with this word logic and we understand what a logical method is. And all you got to do is return back to Ma'at. If you're ever wondering what is logic, Ma'at is logic. The balance is logic. Using logic, spotting contradictory statements. Now pick up the Daily News, the New York Post. And you can see this. You can understand this. Okay, thank you. You can understand this and know this. This is how you can look at contradictory statements. From a historical perspective, if you take the Constitution of the United States, and you will spot almost immediately a contradictory statement. And here's the contradictory statement. We the people. Because we the people didn't put that together. A group of people known as the Haudenosaunee put that together, who the French call the Iroquois. They called it the Kaiya Nerikawa, which is the great law of peace. Who in 1754, Ben Franklin attended a conference with the Haudenosaunee and learned of the way in which they brought their sachems together. And because there were 13 sovereign states in the United States, Ben Franklin was attracted to an idea of how you could bring together 13 sovereign states, remaining sovereign, but at the same time answering to a federation. So we the people didn't put that together. The Haudenosaunee put that together. But even if you look at it a deeper way, we the people didn't. Because African folk and women folk who are part of the people were not in we the people. It was not by the people, and it definitely wasn't for the people. But I'm in the legal aspect, and our brother, Attorney Maddox, can take care of this, so I'm going to leave that alone. Analyzing syllogisms. Again, I thought that was an exceptional word that I had to look up. A syllogism is a formal argument consisting of a major premise and a minor premise leading to a conclusion. Take them through the process. Kepler. Take them through the process. You have a major idea, you have a minor idea, and all of this is going along, leading to a conclusion. It's not aimless, it's leading someplace. So you want to, with the students in deductive reasoning and thinking skills, to analyze this process. Solving spatial challenges. Spatial equals space. The Kemites would have called this nunet or shu. Page 8. Divergent thinking skills. Listing attributes of objects / situations. Generating multiple ideas, which could also be called fluency. In other words, you're generating multiple ideas. Not just one idea, not two ideas. It goes back to, again, you could play back and forth. It just goes back to relating your ideas. Multiple ideas. Nothing is just one. Everything taps into another, has impact on other. Our children don't know this. They don't understand the ripple in the water. The ripple in the water affects everything. The proverb that no person is an island unto themselves, that whatever you do has an impact on the universe. You cannot impact the whales and not think that that's not going to impact us. You cannot get rid of the gorillas of the Virunga Mountains and not have an impact on the entire ecological balance of our world. You cannot mistreat women. You cannot mistreat African people. You cannot mistreat Asian or Native Americans and not think that what went around will not come around. You can't. Yet this society thinks it can, and that's frightening to me because we keep thinking that they're going to pay the price. We all will pay the price. Because when they are impacted by it, we will be impacted by it. And that's why Dr. King said, to free them, to free us, we must free them. As much as we don't like to believe that, it is true. And that's one of the things that we have to look at. Generating different ideas or flexibility. Different ideas, flexibility. The ability to see, like in the netures, for example, to look at a neture to understand that you can look at the sun and call the sun 6 different names. Atum, Ra. You can call you can call it a number of things. Again, because of I pull that out. You can call it a number of things, and it takes a different. Atum is another name. The phoenix is another name. Please. Heru is another name. You can give it the symbol of a circle with a black dot in the middle. You can give it the symbol of a phoenix bird. You can give it the symbol of an eye. It's a different idea, but it's the same concept. Multiple ideas. It's fluent. Generating unique ideas. Generating unique ideas. Not unique in the cosmos, but unique to humanity. Because nothing is new under the sun. But to a young person, their idea, from their perspective, is unique. From their perspective. It is like there's an accident in the middle of the street, and there's a person on every corner. In order to understand exactly what happened, you just can't go to one person. You must go to all people, and if the person in the middle at the accident is still alive, ask them too. Our problem is we've only gone to one person. Therefore, we see the world only through one eye. Generating detailed ideas or elaboration. You elaborate on the idea. You detail it. You give it its flavor. You give it its understanding. You time it. You space it. You give it its historical and its geographical bearing. Synthesizing information. You bring it all together. Synthesize. You bring together. Photosynthesis, what light brings together. Synthesize, you bring it together. So with all of these thinking ideas, although they're divergent, although they may be multiple, different, unique, and detailed, you bring all that together and you come forward with a synthesized idea or notion. Evaluative thinking skills. Evaluative thinking skills, we begin with distinguishing between fact and opinion. I saw somebody. I think I saw somebody. Is that a fact or opinion? That's an opinion, because I may not have seen anybody. I may have just said that. Okay? Now, if I said I'm standing here, that's a fact. You can monitor that. There's a difference between fact and opinion. In this country, one of the most serious problems is we don't know the difference between fact and opinion. We take opinions to be facts, and we factualize opinions. Look at the pyramids. Look at Lord Carnarvon. I'm only going to call him a Lord because that's what they call him. He ain't no Lord to me, but let's call him a Lord because that's his first name, let's say. And Howard Carter. Okay? Go down into this tomb, and they bring forward certain facts. And still no one will say that the 18th dynasty was black. He brought forward this black statue. I got the statue in our center. It's one of the bookends. It's black with a gold staff, gold makeup, gold skirt, gold sandals, gold nemes, black face. But people will tell you there was a fire. Well, that was a particular fire, wasn't it? Funny how it didn't touch the sandal, the eye makeup, the skirt, the nemes. It just touched the skin. That alone should tell you that the fire was black. So if the fire was black, then he must have been black. If you want to deal with fantasy, let's deal there. Fact and opinion. We're still arguing and debating this fact. It's not a fact to argue. And you see, the problem is we still argue. We should be long gone from there. That was yesterday's discussion. The fact is he's black. Let's go back to Wade Nobles. He's black. You can say what you want to. You see? I like this. I like that very much. Because that means a lot to me. That says everything I need to say. Out my face. Judging credibility of a source. Observing and judging observation reports. Do you know there is not one piece of evidence that shows that the Kemetic civilization was built by any other people than an African people? There's not one primary source that exists that will substantiate that. Not one. Not one. Yet, we will take secondhand, secondary sources, and they have made us to believe they're primary sources. My argument is the Memphite text. My argument is the Shabaka stone. My argument is the Bremerin papyrus. My argument is the hymn to Aten, which I have copies of up here. I have two different versions of it. Please. They're telling a lie. They're telling an untruth. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, oh, you say, okay, yes, absolutely. We are accepting their observance and their judgment of their reports. We are accepting that. We are saying, okay, we accept. There is not one piece of evidence that exists that will substantiate that. Yet we have incense holders from Nubia that show the entire pharaonic system in place in Africa amongst African people 9 to 12 generations before the first dynasty of ancient Kemet. Yet with this information of primary source, the incense burner, we don't look at that as a primary source. That's revisionist history, they say. This is the primary source coming up out of the L14 tomb of a pharaoh of Nubia. And here you have some report that someone has said about what someone else said, this he said, she said, that they are using as a primary source, which goes back to an evaluative thinking skill, which we could never even have gotten into the argument if we had used the concept of observing and judging observation reports and using the credibility of the source itself. Say again? Weighing and judging the evidence that you have. identifying central issues and challenges. You see, if you don't know what the central issue is, if you don't zoom in on the centerpiece, you can't deal with the other issues. Because everything flourishes. In physics, it's called centrifugal. That the drawer, while it is catapulted out, it is constantly drawn into the center. Centripetal is the opposite. Okay, it is constantly being drawn in to the middle. Centrifugal means it's sent out, but it is constantly being drawn into the centerpiece. Well, the issues that we're dealing with here, the things that center around all of the other issues as the planets circle the sun. If you do not look at the central issue, you can't understand the peripheral things that are going on. Therefore, people would rather get on to side issues. And that's where we get tripped up, because we get caught up in the side issues which have nothing to do with the central issue. Once we get into the central issue, then we can understand why the side issues are what they are. But if you argue the side issues, you'll never get to the central point. Therefore, the argument will be forever. Therefore, the challenge becomes a problem as opposed to a challenge. Recognizing underlying assumptions. You've got to understand. Dr. Theophilio Benga calls it curious preoccupations. I like that. I like the way he says that. Recognizing underlying assumptions. What are the assumptions that people are saying? What is the agenda that people have? Other than just, why would somebody create a math book and talk all about what people of European descent created when the very number system is Hindu-Arabic? The very numbers they used, they got from the Moors. Because the Moors, you see, even when they say Hindu-Arabic, it's not Hindu-Arabic, it's Hindu-Moor. Because the Moor introduced these numbers to Europe. But because they say the Moors were Arabic, it becomes Hindu-Arabic, but it is not Hindu-Arabic. It is Dravidian Moorish.
But you don't have history.
That's right.
History of the world and what? And you don't study the white man's life. You got to send the white man back.
History is very relevant. Because again, there are two things you must center yourself in life with our young people. And as you're dealing with all these issues, there are two things: time and space. Time is history, space is geography. You see, and if we don't put this together, they'll take a lot of things out. And the things they take out are the very things that create, as we say, the central issue. The number system we use today is Dravidian Moor. It is not even so much Moorish, so much Dravidian, as it is Central African. Because out of the Central African came the foundations of the philosophy that would bring forward all of the other ideas. So again, you go back to the central issue and not the peripheral. Not to take away from the Dravidian, not to take away from the Moor, but to give to the originators of what we're saying. You see, the history of it, because it's key. Because I don't mean to take anything from anybody. I just want to go back to the center. For instance, one of the problems that we're facing in terms of the pyramids of America is that we are not giving the Native American credit for building the pyramids. We are under the impression that Africans built the pyramids. No, they did not. The Africans gave the technology to the Native American, and the Native American was so astute, was so intelligent, and so brilliant that they were good learners. And in turn, they gave to the African knowledge in pharmacology, which is pharmacy, and agriculture that the African didn't have. And the evidence of this is a peaceful coexistence. Sometimes a little skirmish, but that's the way humanity goes. But the evidence of it is that you don't see Africans coming to America selling Native Americans gold. You see Africans teaching them how to build a funeral mask out of jade, the gem of America. You see, we weren't trying to sell them our wares, we were trying to share our knowledge. Our idea was not to come, there was many African folk, there were more African folk in Africa than there were people of European descent. But when Africans came to America, their idea was not to colonize America. It was to share. Of course, the African could have come, but they loved Africa so much, they came to teach and they returned. But when you leave someplace you don't want to be, you colonize where you go. But when you love your home, you visit and you go back. You see, these are the issues of critical thinking skills that giving our children give an underpinning to the great morality and the Ma'atian ethic of African people. And so that's what's important to me. I'm not trying to say that Africans came, because sometimes we end up doing to the Native American what the Europeans did. That the Native American was waiting here, waiting to be enlightened. The Native American was a brilliant individual, had come to understand his and her environment, not to mention, of course, that the first two strands of the African in America was, of course, the people of America were African. And that's the work of Runoko Rashidi. The Twa people were the first to come to America, and then the Clovis Folsom people, or the larger type African, were the second, and then came the Algonquin, which was the first depigmented African to come to America, and then in great numbers came the Eskimo, and so the gene pool of 2 Africans and 2 yellow Asian became red. That's why they're red. They were called red because in the color hue, the balance of brown, black, and yellow is red. So the Native American is an African and an Asian. Detecting bias, stereotypes, cliches, self-explanatory. Recognizing loaded language. Self-explanatory. I could give you a phrase, but I'll leave that alone also. Because I know all this is played out, and I really don't want to play on emotions. And after a while, it gets to the point where we must move on. And we really do. Believe me, there's so much we could say about what has happened these past couple of months to us as a people, and just to the nation and to the world itself. But you know, sometimes you stop and you understand what's important. And when you understand what the central issue is the emancipation and liberation of African people in this hemisphere. Evaluating hypothesis. Evaluating it. Classifying data. Knowing where what goes. Don't put the wrong thing in the wrong way. In other words, if something begins with a B, don't put it in the A section. Put it in the B section where it belongs. Our problem is that we got things that belong in the A section, we got it in Z. And the problem is we don't know the difference between A and Z. Predicting consequences. Very important. Going back to the concept of prophecy. Understanding what your consequences are going to be, the cause and effect. Understanding, predicting your consequences. We could have predicted consequences. The Honorable Marcus Garvey predicted consequences. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad predicted consequences. Malcolm predicted consequences. Bob Marley predicted consequences. Pedro Albizu Campos predicted consequences. Boukman predicted consequences along with Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. We are living their consequences, and we are, in fact, their prediction. And that's what frightens them the most, because we are the future of America. Demonstrating sequential synthesis of information. Demonstrating sequential. In other words, ensure that you put things in sequence. Don't put things ahead of their time. Don't put the horse behind. No, doesn't the horse go before the cart? Okay. Don't put the cart in front of the horse. And if you will notice in the number system, once you get to 10, which is like a little arc, that the singular numbers go to the left. So that would be 11. And then number 12 is planning alternative strategies. In other words, remember going back to your alternative strategies, ensure that you can plan alternative strategies. And by the way, this is page 10. Okay. Yes, please. Yes. The religious Pat Robertson?
Yeah, okay. Sent a team into North California about 4.5 years ago. Make a long story short, they now have over 500 of our children in that school. When we called, people of us tried to get information on the school through the North Board of Ed, they didn't have to register, they had no credibility.
This was apparent. quite frankly, if the parent goes along with it, there's very little you can do. It's the bottom line. The one thing that I would suggest you.
And excuse me, there's a tuition
Okay.
that is higher than our parochial schools,
Sure.
plus uniform.
Sure. I would assume that it's a religious school.
Yeah, it's called the, something Christian school.
Yeah. You know, what I've often offered as suggestions and solutions to all of these types of problems is that we as a people must put up.
Our own.
Yes. And I would challenge that at any point in time that we could put a school together designed as we as a people see fit. We will so far surpass them. Those parents will be begging to bring their children into our school.
We have a college just went bankrupt, so,
Yeah, you see, these are the things we're facing. The realities that we're facing is that, and I believe that another very serious problem is that what Professor Clark teaches us is that, you know, what we're doing now, and I've visited certain schools of African descent, African perspective, and I've been to different places around the country. And what I've noticed is that it's like what Professor Clark teaches us is like putting clean water in a dirty glass. See, the method is as important as what you teach. You see, you could teach European history from an African perspective, and the students will learn everything. You could teach African history from a European perspective, students learn nothing. It's the method that's very important, and if you don't tap into the method, but you see what Christian schools have with Christian students is the method is Christianity. And once the method matches the mind of the child, you'll have success no matter what you teach them. You see? When children get up in the morning, and we could go into a whole nother thing, but I'll let Khalid Muhammad do that. When children get up in the morning and pray, they psych themselves to learn. They immediately psych themselves, no matter if they believe in the prayer or not. Once you put your spirit into it, no matter if it is the proper spirit or not, you're going to gain what they teach you. It works. And what we have got to do is find a way to tap into our African children. See, we're fighting an entire battle. We have been, by the pains of torture and death, been made to hate ourselves. So we've got a monumental challenge ahead of us. We've got to find our children who want to learn this. And once that happens, we can perform things that are called miracles. But they're merely ideas that their time has come. But there's very little that can be done under those conditions if the parents go along. Very little. Very little.
It just reminds me of the Furman thing. You take a child from birth to 10, then you have his mind
Yes.
formed. And this is what's frightening to us, that this is the elementary school.
Yes.
They are forming these
Yes.
minds.
Yes.
What are they forming? We know it's not anything positive.
Yeah. Well, the thing that you have to realize also is that the realization, of course, is that the future will have no place for them. You see, the future will, and as I say, not all of us are going to make it. And for many of us who have grown up in a certain, and you see, remember that people, well, from the Caribbean, but in particular Haitian, and those of Puerto Rican and Dominican and Cuban descent, Candomblé of Brazil, Santeria, Espiritualismo, all of these different faith systems, deeply rooted in the Christian church, they are very steeped in spirituality. And they will pay whatever they have to pay, do whatever they have to do to get their children in the school. And there are realities that we have to face. And my reality is that if I could do it and build a school, I could guarantee you, and if I could choose the staff, I could guarantee you of certain things. Because I have been to schools where children in the beginning just didn't want to hear this stuff. They just didn't want to hear it. And by the time that the class was over, they were saying they kind of enjoyed it. I did a piece on, I did a 3-part series with a class on the Eye of Heru and teaching fractions. It was a 3-part series. I didn't teach them the fractions right away. I told them the Usirian drama first. I played it out. Told them a story. That's the first. Put down your pencils, your pens, clear your desk, let's talk. Formed a circle. I told them Usirian drama. The next week when we came in, we talked about the piece where And you know what I did was that I left it right at the point where Satish plucked the eye of Heru out. Oh, the children, I mean, with that Mortal Kombat stuff. And I played that story to the hilt, too. Okay, you want violence? I'll give you violence. We played that Osirian drama out to the hilt. Them children was on the edge of the seat. Young Latina came to me at the end of the class and said, Mr. Coleman, I know you got to go, but can you kind of give me a hint as to what happens? That's where they were with the story. It wasn't me. It was the method of telling the story that got them. Forget about the fractions. We're not there yet. The next week I came, we continued the story. But we dealt with the psychological dimensions of who was involved in the story, the good, the bad, the determined Aset, the prophetic Nebetet, the evil Setesh, the hurt Heru, who turned to Heru Kuti, who battled his uncle. So then we dealt with that piece to it. And then we broke the eye down. The eye was plucked. It was on the ground. And the eye didn't bounce. It didn't splatter. It cracked in 6 pieces. Oh, children said 6 pieces. I said, yes, that's how Satesh was. He just chopped it up. And then we dealt with the fractions. The 1/2, the 1/4, the 1/8, the 1/16, the 1/32. We dealt with the concept of having, H-A-L-V-I-N-G, the basic way in which Kemites used to do their multiplication and division by having everything, and then in having, you multiply. Because you cannot have 1/2 and not produce 2. Because 1/2 means you have 2 of 1. You cannot have 1/4 without having 4. You see. So as they divided, they multiplied. So we did little problems in addition and multiplication and division and subtract. And then pretty soon all those young people that said that they didn't like mathematics, all of a sudden knew how to find the common denominator.